T'accompagni fighe fighe sulla te cassinami e te porte per quartiere a tuo sole non se vede ma se vede tutto il resto e sarà bene finestra e capisce com'è bella la città e pure cenella com'è bella la città e pure cenella com'è bella la città e pure cenella. Mi dispiace solamente che l'orgoglio che sta gente se mortifica ogni giorno per una manica effettivamente che non tiene coscienza e non tiene rispetto come fanno a piglia suono quando a sera rintogliette quando a sera rintogliette quando a sera rintogliette.
Okay, now guys, do you want them to look at me?
Yeah.
Okay, so look at me.
I'm there doing the film. Can I give you a call back?
I'm just nervous. I'm not actually nervous.
No, I know, but it's sort of a weird situation. So, do you want to just start by telling me some of your early memories of being in Australia?
Yeah, go on, you know.
My first memories were Italy. I was 4.5 when we came out.
When we arrived, I was 22 months.
We arrived in Australia in 1954.
And I was 18 months old when I came to Australia with my parents.
You know, the memories are coming on the ship. Very emotional thing because you've never been out of a little town before. So you get on a big ship with a lot of people you don't know.
And I don't remember very much of Italy, I think, because it's such a traumatic experience, you know, coming out on a ship.
It took a whole month to get here.
Most of my friends were migrants from England. In fact, my best friend, he came on an Italian ship, and we often joked that we came to Australia on the same ship, except we never met each other because he was on the upper decks and we were down the bottom.
And on the boat, I was supposed to go to the English lessons, but I wagged it. I used to like just to play. I was only 8 years old. The Italians and all the migrants that were coming off the boats was just a constant in that era.
I was born in Australia in 1958.
Well, I was actually born here.
Well, I was born here, but I might as well have been born in 1952 in Italy because that's how we grew up. Which is what we often talk about, like those early years are really formative. I just thought that everyone was Italian.
You know, my parents grew up and they would say, siamo tagliato in due, we're cut in half. And it was like one half was in Italy, one half was in Australia. And for me, it was like being cut into thirds because I felt that. You know, I grew up with those stories and they were in my heart and I understood what they meant. But then there was this third, more elusive chapter that I had to sort of always be reconciling.
They came to this country with no language, no understanding of the different culture, and they stayed very confined within their own. And so when we grew up, we're in this crazy kind of dual culture.
I was 4.5 in this new country, and I'd see these boys on corners with newspapers under their arms, selling newspapers. And I've looked at this, and they were getting money for them. And I've looked at this, and I think, we've got newspapers at home. So I've gone home, picked up all these old newspapers, put them on my arm, went and stood on the corner, and I'd sold about half a dozen before one of the men came back and gave me a clip over the ear.
Well, I was born in Kent Street, Richmond. My parents were both obviously Italian immigrants. My father came in 49 and my mother in 52, and she came with my little sister. And at that time, the households were made up of several families, and it was just fantastic because there was an amount of noise and chaos and confusion, but then there was also a lot of affection and food, and it was type of an instant social life, just out of sheer volume of people.
Where I lived in Richmond, your uncles and aunt, they're very close. So there'd be like 10 or 12 families within maybe 100 metres, 200 metres.
We had my uncles and my grandma, of course, living with us because when my dad and my uncle were here, they bought everyone else out. So I just remember you were always with family.
My grandmother raised me because my mother went back to work.
Yeah, mine
Like
too.
yours.
Yeah. But those memories are so, they're full of joy because you were never by yourself. There was always, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, your grandmother especially. Like that was a very formative bond.
Absolutely.
I think growing up, I was closer to my grandparents because I was always there. So it was all about work because mum and dad were always working. And that's all I remember about mum and dad. They were always working. And so we'd always get dropped off or they'd come around.
Yeah, I think the grandparents had a big influence because some of my parents both worked, and I'd be left with the grandparents from birth almost. So I grew up with them. That's how I learned to speak like perfect Italian.
I had a wonderful relationship with my grandfather. I think because he and his wife, my grandmother, had experienced such loss with the loss of their sons, then really family became my mother's children. And being a boy, it was a bit special, and I was the prince of the family, and we had a very urban upbringing. There were quite a lot of Italians, and at that time, my uncles and aunts all lived around us, so we were kind of in each other's pockets.
Being around my grandparents and extended family when I was young, just a sense of enjoyment, conviviality, feeling safe. I remember they were really, really happy times.
And our social life as a family was essentially composed of the get-togethers with all of the relatives and cousins.
So the visitors were good. I remember one year we bought crackers and nearly got murdered for it because we were lighting them in a house at the back in Gibbs Street in Collingwood. And of course, when our parents heard them from inside, they thought we were going to blow ourselves up or something.
And always together celebrating, and life was sort of simple, I think, compared to now.
So my life at home was one of being around my parents a lot. The household was always a constant change from bakery. Then my father took the jump into owning a hotel and running a hotel, which I still don't know to this day what possessed him. But anyway, he did it. He and my mother were quite a formidable partnership. Having said that, and having realised what sort of environment it was, then it caused me at the age of, I think it was 9, where I was then banished to boarding school.
Yeah, when I went to school, I wasn't prepared for it. I don't think they explained to me what school was. All I remember in the morning, Dad took me off to the barber, Glenferrie Road, and shaved my head. Dropped me off at school, and I thought, what's going on here, Dad? He left me there, and he's trying to explain to me, you've got to stay here. And
We certainly were the first Italians at the school, St. Cecilia's.
But yeah, no, we were definitely the token Italians.
The language was the biggest barrier because you couldn't speak a word of English.
Everyone around me spoke Italian. I couldn't speak English when we first started school.
Yeah.
Just spoke Italian.
My English wasn't that good. I'd learned a little bit on the boat.
I remember I didn't have a word of English. I had no idea. It was the biggest culture shock. I wasn't prepared for it.
Probably the one thing that I recall that always stays in my mind was, for those who are old enough will remember the flashcards from the readers, and I was asked to go and get the flashcard for a particular character. I kept coming back with the wrong one, and she just kept hitting me in the back of the leg with a 3-foot ruler.
You know, I was just told to sit in the back of the class and listen in those days. There was no assistance, no remedial teaching or...
There was me and another 2 or 3 other Italians. They had special classes for us, like to teach us English.
I had this memory about being kept back, and I didn't realise why I'd been kept back. And then years later, I realised that I went to school and I couldn't speak English, and that was the reason why I was kept back. So that was, that was a big revelation for me.
Like Maria had said before, I didn't speak English either. Although I feel like the next day we could. Like it was, we started like that.
I was fortunate that I was good at maths because I'd already done the maths in Italy, so maths, arithmetic were really my forte in those days. I used to do all right in those, and it gave me a bit of confidence.
But as far as other subjects were concerned, like maths and things like that, we were actually more advanced than they are here. It's only when I started meeting other Italian guys who were trying to find their own way at the school and we could speak some Italian, but remember I spoke a dialect. I spoke a few words and we could sort of understand what we were going through and we stuck together.
Secondary school, there was a group of us, of Italians, that tended to hang together more than others, and you knew you were different, but I wasn't particularly worried about that.
Our school, Richmond High School, the predominant community was Greek, and so I was in a setting where there was a lot of other Europeans. So it wasn't like, being in a terrible English school in Baldwin where you're one of 5 Italians, you're one of 250. So I actually felt quite comfortable.
Τα πουλιά και τα άνθη, μάλιστα. Αυτά τι κάνουν, στολίζουν, δηλαδή ομορφαίνουν την φύση. Εάν δεν υπήρχαν αυτά, θα υπήρχε...
I don't remember primary school or even secondary school having anyone call me a wog. It just assimilated completely. That wasn't an issue at all for me.
Never really had any problems at school. There was no prejudice even getting a job.
As such, we didn't experience any discrimination or...
I never felt that I was discriminated against.
I think being good at sport helped.
And sport was football, Aussie rules football, cricket, athletics and swimming, right? So I took a soccer ball to school and played with the English kids and that, and we were playing. Anyway, one of the teachers saw this soccer ball and grabbed it and took me to see the head teacher, right? And I got into trouble for bringing a soccer ball to school.
Well, this is an easy story to tell about the schooling experience and the boarding school experience, simply because I was Italian background, walking into an Irish Catholic organisation, going to boarding school without mum and dad being there to run back to. I can tell you that for the first 6 months it was very, very hard, and on the phone every night saying, when am I coming home, when am I coming home?
I felt different to my Aussie school friends at the time, almost in every way. The way I ate food, the way I thought about food, the way I thought about life, the way I behaved. I mean, the language was completely different. It took a while. I think by the time I was about sort of 6 or 7, I got a real grasp of the English language.
And the main things I remember was my grandfather taking us to school, myself and my cousins, because we were all there, and there's about 4 or 5 of us there at the same time, and having to go through that literally running through the gauntlet of what was worse was either the smell of the toilets overflowing or having to dodge the state school kids spitting on us. So they were, because we were Catholic dogs, that we were classified.
So in year 5, you're up against year 8 students who are picking on the fact that, you know, instead of having Bermuda shorts, I had typical Italian short shorts. Instead of barter shoes, I had Italian shoes. So I was non-compliant, according to the majority of the kids there. So I was an easy target.
And because I was Italian, I was picked on a lot. I was called silly names like Greasy Dago, and I didn't understand what these words were.
So you got picked on. Obviously, you got picked on because at then they called you wogs, but you took it in your stride, and that was that.
For the first 6 months, I'd come home and I'd have a blood nose or I'd been in a fight. Mum and Dad says, "What's going on?" You know, and I said, "My name was Diego." In Italian, my name was Diego, right? And they were calling me Dago. So I learned pretty quickly that it was derogatory. We all went to see the teacher to get some resolution, you know, what to do. So the teacher suggested change his name.
And the headmaster, he looked at me and he asked me, "What is your name?" And I said, "Eustachio de Stephanis." So he looked down at me and Eustachio de Stephanis. And he says, "We'll call you Jim."
So I picked Alan. We changed it by default. And the reason that I picked Alan was that Alan Ladd was a cowboy in the movies, right? So I picked Alan.
And I remember the first thing he said to me, he goes, Ivano, when you go to school, you don't get called Ivano, you change your name to Ivan.
Another story with my school experiences is, remember, some of the Australians didn't accept us, and some of the Australian boys in grade 4, 1964, they started a club. And when myself and 2 other Italians that I hung out with wanted to join, they said, "No, you're not Australian, you can't join our club." So we were a little bit despondent, but what we did, we formed our own club. It was called the Wagon Wheel Club. And one of the boys, Tony Begoni, who went on to be a QC and Supreme Court judge, his parents are quite well off, and he used to get a lot of pocket money. He said, "Don't worry, we'll start our own club." And in there we had our own club, and you had to get in there. There's only 3 members. You have to have a password, and otherwise we weren't allowed in. It was that sort of society. And in there we can I say this? At grade 4 we had cigarettes, which we didn't know how bad they were, and we'd smoke away. We were able to buy adult magazines and look at all the stories and cartoons and pictures. And we discussed all these manly or adult topics, and we were doing quite well until one day we read about cancer, smoking and cancer. And then we just, we don't want to die, we're really like young kids. So we stopped the smoking part.
I remember at lunchtime, my mum used to make my lunch for me every day, and I'd be around kids my age that didn't understand salami or mortadella.
You know, roast, prosciutto, tomatoes, garlic, you name it.
I'd bring my lunch and it'd be stained with oil.
And thick cut, crusty Vienna bread that was cut by a knife and it was uneven, and each slice was like 2.5 centimetres thick.
So when you went out for lunch, you didn't actually need to know where your bag was. You'd actually smell where your bag was, And
unfortunately, in the first year or 2, we had to sit together and we ate as a class. And the kids got into this song and started singing "Fat Sanguigeno, Fat Sanguigeno," and it was really sad.
These guys will be having hundreds and thousands or Vegemite or something, and they're like, "Wow, what are you eating?"
I remember Mum trying to anglicise it by cutting off the crusts and trying to get it to the stage where it looked more like I said, "Mum, look, don't bother. Just let's leave it alone."
As Mum made my sandwiches in the morning, rolls, whatever, I'd walk up the lane behind my house, and there was a few dogs up the lane, and I'd just throw it over the fence and go without lunch.
We got to bring up the sungo nut sandwiches. So parents would make the sungo nut sandwiches, and you bring it to school, and the other kids had hundreds of thousands. You just say, "I've got chocolate spread. You want to swap?" Yeah.
And the teachers would say, "Where's your lunch?" And so some days I'd bring it. Then a couple of the other boys just said, "Can we swap?" And they had peanut butter sandwiches and Vegemite, hundreds of thousands sandwiches on white bread. It was heaven. So we had a win-win. We had a swap, and I was happy, and they were happy. And I never told my mother; she would have probably killed me.
So I think I was 9 years old. Just went up there and enrolled myself. 9 years old, no problems. And the headmaster, an old English headmaster, said, "Oh, you must come here with your parents." Oh, so I took my mum next time. My mum could speak English, so I realised why I went there by myself.
My parents didn't really speak the language, so anything that had to be communicated with the school had to really be through me.
I think we used to keep our lives very separate. I kept my home life and my school life very separate.
I think my parents never went to school other than going to church.
Yeah,
So no parent-teacher interviews. We were totally independent, no guidance. We just sort of thumbed their way through.
The whole school had a play and every class had to do something. And I remember we, in grade Brubs or grade 1, I can't remember exactly what year, we had nursery rhymes, and I used to play Humpty Dumpty while the kids sang the song Humpty Dumpty. Sat on the wall, and the wall was a vaulting horse, and I had a costume. But the play was on a Sunday, and we had a problem because when the weekend came, I told my parents I've got to go to school, I've got to do the play. They didn't articulate that I could actually go to school on a Sunday. No, you're not going to, there's no school on a Sunday. And they forbid me so wet to go, and I couldn't explain to them how important this was. So no matter how much I protested, they said, "No, you're not going." So the next day I went to school and I got in a lot of trouble with the teachers because that part of the play had to be, it didn't happen.
Never did any extracurricular activities outside of school, like ballet or tennis or, my parents just, very academic, Because I remember I said to Dad, "Oh, I really want to do jazz ballet." And he said, "No."
I was very sporty, so I'd go to, when I went to school, I'd try out for the softball team. I made it. Go home, no, not allowed.
Never went swimming because they were always afraid that I would drown in the pool. So by the time I was old enough to actually go swimming, I felt too embarrassed to take the lessons because everybody my age could swim and I couldn't. So I didn't want to, show that I couldn't swim. So I blame my parents for that.
Yeah, but our parents want us to have a good life, not to be a bum around. Good life. What's your parents want you to do?
Go to church, mate.
No, what's your parents want you to do? No, in a job. What do they want you to do? Engineer. And what do you want to do?
My father's been a bit
Bludgers, that's the best job there is. Doesn't pay, but that's the way it is.
My parents' attitude towards education was very strong.
Education was #1 priority.
It was all about education. Go to school, go to school, go to school. To someone who didn't want to go to school.
Mum and Dad weren't career focused, they were work focused, and they had come from an agrarian culture in Italy, and their advice to me would be comments like, study because we want you to use a pen and not a pick.
Yeah, for Dad it was, he buys me Encyclopedia Britannica. I think I've read them twice. Thousands of dollars of these beautiful books.
Education was really important and work was really important. You had to do both well, to the best of your ability.
Parents would want to live through their children what they weren't able to achieve or weren't given the opportunity of doing, especially given during the war, etc.
I think the Italian community was very much that education, because you had to be a doctor, or you had to be an architect, or.
Well, this is a land of opportunity. There was nothing stopping us from doing whatever we wanted.
And the reason that they pushed so much is because they didn't want us ending up working in factories like they did.
Yeah.
How do you do, Angela? Come va? Qualche cosa? Parlare quello che vuoi dire tu. No, tu domanda ma in inglese. Le ragioni dei migranti, no? No, a te... Vita avuto successo nella vita, ha avuto successo. Yeah, let's speak English. I'll tell you, look, 21 years ago there were few migrants. It was very easy for us to adapt to the new environment because... Yes, it was. For the simple reason we were very few, you know. We were very few, it was easy. Now, there are so many Italians which they come over. We do speak Italian, we do keep our tradition in here. I think it's very hard for migrants to adapt themselves to the new environment for the simple reason they are all together from the community. They don't spread like we used to do it. We stick together. Also, they think in here it's a Shangri-La, you know what I mean, an Eden. They've been told, I don't know where they get the idea from, but they've been told it's easy money. You know, money from the tree. Believe me, it's not what they tell them. You got to work for it.
We didn't have a lot to do with Australian society, or at least I didn't anyway. And mainly with the relatives, as I said, just mainly the relatives.
Well, my parents generally hung around with Italians. The language was the barrier. That was the chief barrier.
I think this was born through necessity because in those days, Italians wanted to be with people that they could relate to.
I do remember going with my grandmother to her appointments. All her, like if she had to go to the hospital or the doctor, they needed like someone to interpret.
There was a dichotomy in my rearing because I felt incredibly Italian, but I knew that I was moving into a different world. Unlike the community today where diversity is celebrated and it's a much more inclusive community and difference is just simply difference. But when I was growing up, difference was odd. Difference was sometimes bad.
Mum tells me, things that have stuck in my mind about Mum's experience is that when they were in Italy, and she was a young girl, like she came here when she was 13, the Italian government or the Australian, I don't know who, just sold Australia to them as, you know, you'd find gold on the streets. And so I guess there was this excitement and anticipation about coming to Australia. And then when Mum arrived in Port Melbourne and she looked at what was before her, she said, "My God, where am I?" She just felt Australia was very backward. Her uncle said to my nonno, his brother, and girls in Australia don't wear makeup and they don't wear jeans. And so my grandfather all of a sudden forbade his daughters from wearing makeup, from wearing jeans.
I felt very different because I wanted to be Australian. I spoke the language well, you know, did all that well. But I always felt restricted. Then you would hear that girls in Italy had a lot more freedom. Oh, they wore lipstick, and it's like, I don't know, I just felt I was in jail for a lot of time until, you know, sometimes I think when you get married, it's a bit of freedom at that age.
Well, sisters had it a bit harder than I had. I mean, I was allowed to go out more being a male. Whether they let me, I just went out anyway. I was kind of, I wouldn't necessarily listen to what they had to say. And I'd just go out and do my own thing. Whereas the sisters, being girls, they were highly protected.
Less issue for boys going out than girls at the time. So if you're an Italian girl at the time, not good. We tend to be a little...
I experienced that with my sister.
Yeah.
I experienced it with my sister, yeah. I didn't realise it then. I just thought it was just a normal sort of thing because she'd come out with us. So she actually got to come out with us. So I didn't realise at times that she didn't come out with us, but she wasn't allowed out.
When we went to high school together, we gravitated to the Italian group. So there were about 9 of us and we were all Italian. And that was by necessity because we just weren't allowed to go out like the Australian girls.
We had to be creative prior to going out. So it wasn't as like, I'm going out. It was like, where are you going? Who are you going with? What time are you going to be home? So we had to be creative, which I guess another word for creative is perhaps a few white lies about where you were going and who you were going with.
We had to lie to go out. Yeah, we did. We had to lie. Then you'd go and ask your mother and she'd say, what did your dad say? And you'd say, he said yes. And so each of them thought that they both said yes, so you went. Or they'd say, who else is going?
But look, parents were protective, weren't
But
they?
we managed to get out.
Yeah.
It was like the lies were necessary to form some kind of social life, because otherwise it just wouldn't exist.
Yeah, yeah.
And what else happened when we were teenagers is that we kind of stuck together, because it was very easy to hang around with Marie or Pina or the Inas. Pina, Lena, Tina, Philomena. But it was easy because there was no explanation.
I was their guinea pig. As soon as I was allowed to do something, so was my sister. My mum and dad, honestly, my mum and dad were about equality. It was a very egalitarian household in the way we were brought up.
And there's one special story. I remember one of my aunts, she was dating a fellow, and we had to, well, the sisters had a chaperone, and I used to tag along sometimes. One particular day, we chaperoned them to the botanical gardens. We sat around this lake, and they wanted to talk and have a bit of a kiss or whatever, so rather than do it in front of us, we were on one side of the bush, and they were on the other. Like, we weren't allowed to, well, they weren't allowed to go out of sight. A couple of times I think I chaperoned them to a dance, but I might have left them at an Italian dance and went somewhere else and picked them up later on. And I wasn't a fan of that stuff.
I remember when I started uni, I was the only Italian girl. The other students would always be going out on the weekend and they'd invite me. And I ran out of excuses. Oh, we've got a family function. Oh, I've got something on. Oh. And in my head I go, oh, I've absolutely got nothing on, but I'm not allowed to come out with you. So I couldn't have boys around. Whereas my sister, who's 15 years younger, they'd ring, she can go out, they'd pick her up. So you sort of feel that you missed out. But then, so when my brother got older, he would come home as my dad's leaving for work, you know, like 2 in the morning. And I always swore, he'll kill me for this, I would never marry an Italian, because I was scared that they would want to go back to Italy. And I don't think I could have coped doing that, because basically this was my country, even though I was born in Italy.
Yeah, my parents both worked, and my dad realised that my mother had worked and had to look after 4 kids. So I could say he was that didn't quite follow the traditional male role, in that he knew my mother was working, so he could cook, wash dishes, did everything to help.
I think, you know, it should be just equal. It was like, you know, you either do something or to help change nappies or whatever needs to be done. And to this day, he still does. But that's his character too. Like, you know, his brother saw me once and just was doing the dishes, and I think he nearly had a fit. You know, that's not a man's job, but hey, at the end of the day, we're a family, so.
Rita.
My parents were always comparing me to my cousins because they were all getting married very young, having kids very young. And, you know, to them, I was sort of, you know, the last boy on the freeway.
We lived next door to the Brewers. The Brewers. Sandra, Julie, Alan, Peter. There was a connecting gate between my grandfather's backyard and our backyard, and their backyard. And so we would often swap. It was like the first true multiculturalism, I reckon. It was, they had no idea what was going on in our house, especially when there were like 50 kids and adults, and there was a lot of screaming going on.
That night, no. Take a shot at you. Excellent. Okay, see you
And
later.
Mrs. Harper and her husband lived across the road, and for many, many years we all called her Mrs. Harps because that's what Mum called her. And then one day I realised it was actually Harper.
We also lived next door to Mr. and Mrs. King and Judy and Trina. And
did their house smell like roseland?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, what is this exotic thing? Stale cigarettes and roseland. It was great.
That smells of lasagna.
Oh, yeah. That was great.
Well, my Australian name is weird. I think to our parents, they're even, you know, Well, in fact, probably sometimes we'd defend them. You know, we'd be defending Australia because they were, you know, because they were so different to our parents, really different to our parents. So
I found them intriguing. I reckon they felt, if anybody was weird, was the way they looked at us.
yeah.
I think we must have been really weird to them.
Yeah, because I reckon they thought that we came from Mars, like not another country.
Because everything we did was completely different.
Yeah.
What struck me about Fairfield, because in those days it was regarded as the outer suburb, and a lot of the other Tukulanis and Abruzzese that lived in Fitzroy or Collingwood or South Melbourne, they said, where the hell did you go? You know, and my frustration in those days was that I would look outside and no one would be playing outside. Compared to Toko, in Toko, I'd leave the house and there'd be kids playing everywhere, and I'd join in, and it was great.
We were the first family, I think, in the street, which was again really unusual because this was a very, very Anglo-Saxon neighbourhood.
I grew up in Collingwood. That was a very Aussie neighbourhood, very Aussie neighbourhood.
In Reservoir, it was basically very Australian people.
As far as the street was concerned, the neighbours, etc., after another Italian boy moved in across the road, and then another one just a few doors up from there, they'd come out and we'd play, and then the Aussies started to join in. So within a few years, we had the whole street going. We would play cricket out in the street.
It was a really safe neighbourhood. There was a mix. There were Greeks in our street, there were Australians, there were some other Italians, and I remember knowing pretty much everyone in my street. So when I'd walk to school, that sense of like community, looking after kids was there.
It was typical Thomastown, so a lot of the kids I played with were either Italian or Greek or Macedonian in those days. We used to just, you know, typical Aussie kids really, because we played a lot of footy, played a lot of cricket in the street. I would say that I could count probably 15 or 16 different cultures. And so that was just wonderful. So, you know, there's my mate Johnny, who was Chilean, my friend Jack, who was Timorese, my best mate Vlad, who was Filipino, my friend Rowett, who was Indian. Our next door neighbours were Maltese, we were the Italians. And then there were Macedonian families.
We spoke Tokolano at home, but my two best friends across the road who used to walk me to state school because it was on the other side of the railway line, they were Aussies. Now I spent most of my time with them, and the old Australian lady across the road, they were like my go-to people because I didn't have a sister until I was 15.
So in those days, you didn't text or Instagram or any of that stuff. They'd stand at the fence and go, Peter, how did Peter? Well, they went, somebody decided I was Peter. But they'd be at the fence, and my mum would go, Mum, who's this Peter? Don't worry about it, mate, it's next door. So they'd be calling me and I'd go out to obviously play. That's how we used to call each other, Peter, and that you'd go.
Peter, that's a whole
Peter.
At least mine was close.
My parents, obviously, their English wasn't up to scratch, if I can put it that way. And so it would have been a bit harder for them to have Aussies as friends, even though the neighbours, etc., they were good to us because my dad was a very generous man. He would bring over some wine or a bit of prosciutto, etc.
Then, of course, as we did the various things that my parents did in those days, which would have been the tomatoes, the wine making, and I think we even did the pigs back then. We even you know, had to make the sausages and what have you. There was a lot of activity and a lot of excitement in the household, which we had a few visits from the police with the neighbours.
I mean, where I lived, it was mainly Italian, a lot of Italian, a lot of Greeks. So Saturday morning was rugs out, belling rugs, music was blaring. It was kind of a Saturday, you know. Neil's like, what the hell's going on?
They thought we were making some illegal activity there, but my father, I think, certainly won him over with a few bottles of wine and what have you, and we didn't have any problems after that. I think as the years went on, we got to know the neighbours quite well, but initially we were certainly a novelty in the street.
Maybe we were trying to be Australian. That was probably something that that was, not that you didn't want to be Italian, but you were trying to be Australian, so you're trying to assimilate with everyone. I think that was probably something that you did, and you probably did it subconsciously anyway, you know what I mean? It's like,
Mum and Dad were pretty, they were happy to be amongst Australians and to be with Australians. And I can always remember Dad was just so proud to be Australian. Now, actually, I think at the end he probably thought in English rather than in Italian. No, he used to say to me at uni, these Italian boys you go out with, they're very nice, but you really should go out with some Australians. I said, but Dad, all they want to do is drink and play football.
We are food obsessed. Everything was about food.
yeah.
Food was obviously such a big part of it.
Breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, food.
Regarding food, we always had good quality food and the best of what we could afford, I guess, because they might have skimped on a lot of things. They were cheapskates in a lot of ways. They were always trying to save money or invest money. But when it came to food, we didn't go without.
The best steak, they always wanted the best, and they would travel far to get the best and the freshest.
Dad had this amazing garden. Everything was grown. So talk about organic.
And we were up with the fig trees in the garden and veggies and all that stuff.
In the backyard, they grow a few tomatoes and beans and things like that, like all Italians like to do. I mean, we come from a farm community anyway, so it's just a natural thing to carry on what you know to do best.
And no wonder I ended up in hospitality. It's like all my fondest, earliest memories are connected to food and people. And it wasn't even what you ate, even though that was extraordinary. It was the feeling of, like, this is what you do. This is how you share it.
And by the way, now I got to tell you.
Family meals growing up were very much a ritual. 6 o'clock we ate, everyone sat around the table, and it was the time of the day where you sat, you ate, you talked, you discussed your day, get into massive arguments about politics or whatever.
To this day, my mother is still known for her cuisine. And again, I don't say my mother alone, because our mothers were all brilliant cooks. So it's just because she was exposed to a hotel environment and the way that she used to present and cook as if it was for her own family. So she treated everyone like family. And her famous dish was the parmigiana that still I run into people in this day and age where they still say, I remember your mother's parmigiana.
What I remember coming home from school is being fed
Oh,
T-bone steak.
I guess the snacks.
That was the snack before dinner.
Oh, well, afternoon tea, that was funny because that was the first time I'd ever heard it was at the brewer's house. And we got home from school and the Miss Brewer said, would you like a little afternoon tea? And I was, ready for my rare T-bone steak. And out came bread and butter, like sliced white bread and butter. I was a little like, anyway, I've never tasted anything more delicious in my life. It was like the most exotic, beautiful thing. She had teacups, not espresso cups, teacups.
It was great. Well, speaking of espresso, we used to get a shot at that before we went to school. We're talking primary school. So my grandmother used to, even worse than espresso, the egg yolk with some masala.
Oh, yeah.
And sweet that. So I always say, we went to school. No wonder we can't remember being traumatised. We were drunk.
When we moved to Camberwell, Dad got a job with Pomona Pumps, right? And the owner was a guy called Fred Bethune. Bethune invited us to dinner at his house in Brighton, right? So Mum and Dad and I went off, for dinner. And this house, it was like, a very big house in Brighton. It had a full-size billiard table, a theatre room. Right, this is in the late 50s sort of thing. Anyway, we've gone there for dinner, right? So we've had this French onion soup, watery soup sort of thing, a chop with 3 veg, and dessert I can't remember. So we've come out and I said, what's going on? I said, they're rich. They haven't got any food. And we went home and Mum cooked pasta,
I did have an Australian friend, her name was Leonie, and she said, come over to my place for lunch on Saturday. I mean, I couldn't wait all week. I'm going to lunch to somewhere. You know what? This is fantastic. So when we got to her house, the mother said, we were living in Fairfield. I was probably about 13 by now. And so the mother said, Leonie, here's some money. Go and buy 2 pasties. I'm like, buy? Shit. Are we buying lunch? So we went down the street, we bought 2 pasties and we put them on that plate and we had a knife and fork, and I'm just thinking, wow, this is just something, surreal. Like there's just no way that we'd ever be given any money to go and buy any food. Forget about it.
Our social life essentially composed of relatives. I cannot remember a time where my parents and I and my sister went to a restaurant. It was either at the club or a wedding. And if I'm not mistaken, every cousin of mine, every blood cousin that married, met their partner at somebody else's wedding. So the wedding was like RSVP, except with a lot of lasagna.
Generally speaking, our interaction with fellow Tokolanis were either through the club, the Scotchman Street Miketi Club, or eventually Casa, of course. But generally the functions that we would have would be either to celebrate birthdays or milestone events, communions and things like that, and weddings, the infamous weddings that used to be celebrated at town halls. And they were memorable only if to recall the number of times you'd be running around and sliding on the floors, and they were great memories.
There were parties all the time. It was either a communion, a christening, and then when all the little ones started, because it's about 9 years between me and the rest, like my sister's age, it was parties all the time. Yeah, so it was good. That's when I enjoyed, I think, stuff. We used to go to dances at Richmond and...
Yeah, when we were growing up, I don't remember ever going to restaurants. We used to go to weddings. That was about the only time that we'd go out and have a meal.
Entertainment venues were when at Tokolani, or there was a wedding, and they would just about invite half a toko.
It was a big part of the Italian culture, and even just keeping up all the traditions that they brought over from Italy with them, especially like, making the wine and doing the bottled tomato sauce. Like that's such a big thing because, you'd have all your extended family come over.
When it was time to make the wine, you help the parents make the wine, and when it's time to make the sauce, you help the parents make the sauce.
Once a year we used to go and kill the pig, and that was a big experience. They got me to participate. Remember, they were trying to hand down these traditions. And I recall my job was, I had to straddle the pig, and my job was to hold the ears back while they cut its throat. And the reason they did that is they wanted to catch the blood to make some grenache, which was like a jam. They made a jam out of it for sweets and things.
And I remember, the whole pig hanging in the garage.
I had the worst job ever. We had to stir the blood. And then Mum put the chocolate in while I stirred the blood. So
Whenever my friends would come, home and walk into the home, they would always be welcome to stay for dinner. And of course, they'd always be eager to stay. But they would always be staggered by the amount of food that was on the table.
the biggest thing is when friends came over, they thought we'd only have one meal. Like they'd eat something, so they thought they were finished. Yeah. Then other stuff started coming in. They were just in awe. They just couldn't believe how much food we ate.
There's always the starvation story, like when they were...
Yeah,
you
that's
got
right.
peas. I hate peas. Eat the peas because you're lucky you got peas. Oh, I don't want the peas. So you're right.
Yeah.
Everything had to be eaten. Everything had to be finished.
Yeah, nothing's wasted.
Regardless whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I don't ever think we never have leftovers. I've grown up without leftovers. We never had leftovers.
Would go on Sundays when my grandmother was still alive, my mum's mum, and the big table out the back, under the veranda at the back, with watermelon, with grapes, with, you know, pasta, the kids running up and down. But it was always Sundays getting together with the family. I do remember that fondly.
Sunday lunch was a pretty serious affair. You wouldn't be getting up Sunday lunch and just having toast.
Sunday lunch especially, it was always together, and it was a 3-course meal. In fact, every meal was a 3-course meal, come to think of it, except breakfast, but lunch, dinner, always. And on a Sunday, we would all sit around the dining room table on the outside and around here because we could see the TV, because we had to watch World Championship Wrestling.
Oh, yeah. Midsection. And Milano's shaking up the spoilers. Killer Carl Cox enters the ring. A kick, another kick to the back. Oh, man. What a grueling tag team match.
It was an era when you'd come to the hotel when we first bought it. The old Aussie menu was, you know, steak and chips, sausages and onions and things like that. So it became a scenario the first week in, my mother started completely revamping and cooking as if she was cooking as our mothers used to cook for us, all the Tocalan type or Italian dishes. And I remember calamari being on the menu the second week and people were just returning it, not knowing what it was. By the third week, plates were coming back pretty clean.
That now things like goppa and so many things that were different are now considered to be new, and they're exotic, and you know that's amazing. You know now you pay a lot of money for it. In those days, you're sort of running away from it to some extent. So I think I think, as I said, I'm grateful for the culture that it's given me and being able to understand so much more.
The wanting a little puppy when I was at home, and I was just forbidden to have because we had no pets. None of my relatives really had pets, and I always used to say that if anything had a pulse and we weren't related to it, it would end up in Sulgor.
The pet thing is interesting. Or like talking about pets the other day, and it was funny because you have to say it. What did you say? What pets?
Can you eat it?
Yeah.
If you couldn't eat it, you probably weren't going to get it as a pet.
Yeah.
So you had chickens, rabbits.
Yes.
Because you were eventually going to eat them.
Well, we used to, school holidays, we used to shoot birds with the slug guns. You know, those big trees, you go shoot pigeons. Instead of getting told off when your parents went home, you'd go, fantastic, what's waiting for dinner tomorrow night?
My grandfather, my dad's dad, he, someday, I don't know what happened, but this pigeon, it was a pure white pigeon, befriended him, and it would follow him. So he'd go for a walk and the thing would just follow him. And then one day it ended up on a dinner table. You know, like that's just how it was. You've got to remember where they came from. They came from farms. They came from poverty. So, yeah, if you couldn't eat it, so no, we never had a dog.
Oh, I had a duck at Uncle Dino's. I had Paddy the duck, and I was told that Polly, the dog across the road, had killed my duck. And as a result, I didn't speak to Polly the dog ever again. And I found out when I was about 12 that I'd actually eaten my duck at Easter because the duck had been fattened for Easter.
Family outings.
You know, there were times where we'd go off these picnics down the beach.
I remember we used to go on a lot of picnics where we'd drive to, you know, at the countryside, you know, past Lilydale.
In 2018, we bought a car, a Falcon, Ford Falcon, and we used to take my parents out if they wanted to go places. But my father didn't drive and my mother didn't drive. I was the only one who could drive the car.
Every
couple of weeks, or maybe once a month, we go for trips up the country, you know, and people, most of them had got cars by then, Fiats. 90% were Fiats.
You usually have a file of cars following each other because it was just not yourself, it'd be a few relatives together.
Going with a cavalcade of cars.
And we'd head off, you know, and it'd be like a car race, you know, to get to these places. They were crazy.
And you all had to follow each other in case someone got lost. When they driving down Warrnambool Road, at the end of the road, the beaches there, who didn't get lost, I don't know, but they felt safer going together.
And we'd go and have a picnic, you know, for the day.
And we'd have a picnic somewhere with, 5 or 6 carloads of relatives.
I remember, summers when in the summer we'd go to the beach, and back in those days it was a long trip.
It just takes so long to get anywhere, didn't it? Like,
Well, I didn't realise Phillip Island was that close.
The food would be prepared the night before. There's a big production.
We'd start packing at, 5:30, 6 in the morning. There'd be food, there'd be cooking, there'd be commotion. Pack the car, there'd be arguments, screaming, what are you doing?
That was unbelievable.
Get there at like lunchtime.
Yeah.
How far is this place? That takes like 20 minutes. You get to Phillip Island.
And then, of course, you have this huge banquet, and everyone shares the food and that.
Yeah, no, we couldn't go anywhere and not stop and have something to eat. You know, you just couldn't drive straight there.
An Italian cannot drive more than 45 minutes.
No, so we had...
Stop, cigarette, stretch your legs.
We'd get to the beach and all the food would come out, and we're talking, 2 or 3 tables long.
And it wasn't just a matter of, a couple of sandwiches. It was bringing a whole bowl full of pasta.
I reckon Mum brought half the house with her.
With meatballs and then schnitzel.
Like, there'd be pots and pans and everything, like, seriously.
And then the coffee and then the fruit.
My mum would cook pasta, a big bowl of pasta.
And it was just unbelievable because, you had to have your pasta on a Sunday. You couldn't go without.
On some beachy cranberry, you'd be eating pasta. Like, really? Sandwich wouldn't suffice?
I think I'm traumatised about going to the beach and picnics exactly for that reason, because to get to the beach or to go to a picnic, it would take forever. The amount of chairs and stuff that you have to bring out of the car and put back in the car and so now every time I think about going on a picnic, it reminds me of that, and I'm thinking, oh no, let's just go to a bar instead.
And it was the most embarrassing thing ever, because you look at the Australians on the next table having fish and chips.
So I think the Aussie would see us coming and then they'd run.
We just wanted fish and chips, quite frankly. Yeah, right? Yeah.
And they'd have everything with them. Like, they'd take everything with them. You wouldn't buy anything. Like, there's no way you'd buy anything. So you'd stop somewhere and then they'd pull everything out of the car, heat everything up, because you couldn't have a cold. So heat everything up, and so it was just amazing.
And that was good to catch up with all the cousins and have the picnic and then drive back. I don't know, something that has been lost.
On the weekends, we generally visited parenti and friends, and we either go to their house or they'd come to our house.
But I also remember visiting people, going to visit people, and you had to be on your best behaviour.
And it was boring as hell if they didn't have kids. A lot of the times they didn't. And so you just have to sit there and listen to adult conversation with nothing to do.
Before you walk in the door, you'd get the lecture about, make sure that you're polite, make sure that, you don't overdo anything.
And, you couldn't move. Sometimes you'd go, and she'd go, say it. All right. That was more my father than my mother. But then you knew the cue for we were almost ready to go was when the coffee was being talked about.
The men would sit and drink beer, the women would talk and gossip, and us kids would go around gallivanting around the streets of Thomastown and having fun.
The other thing that sticks in my mind a lot is that when my dad's friends used to come over to our house, or we used to go to their house, but it wasn't family or mates like. Where all the guys would just be singing, you know, Jesse would be on the guitar, and all the old blokes. Well, I call them old blokes, and probably, you know, younger than us. Yeah. I'll be singing the old Italian songs, drinking the homemade wines, homemade prosciutto and this type of juice. And, you know, you could see that they're really having a good time.
Happy go lucky.
Really having a good time.
Yeah.
It's definitely enriched, I think, our lives, having both, being exposed to both.
My sister, my younger sister, she went to school and it was great to be Italian. It was trendy to be Italian, you know, so.
It's nice to be called Carmine instead of Charlie.
I did find it hard to distinguish whether I was Italian or Australian for a long time.
Yes.
And I think I was probably 35 before I thought, oh, I'm Australian. You know, so that my parents married here, that I did feel Australian, and I do feel Australian now.
If someone asks me, you know, what's your national, what comes to my mouth is I'm Italian.
That's why they came, for a better life for us.
Absolutely. And they achieved that. I still say to my mother, you've achieved that. You did create a better life for us. We do have a better life.
Yep, we're lucky. We're lucky people.
So the things that marginalised us, in a sense, are the things that are today a part of the fabric of our society.
We're back in vogue.
And that's it, guys. It's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
Ero come canare innamorato, stupore che cantai mattina e sera. Scende di che non vuoi stascerare, e mo non canta manca primavera. Chi voglio bene non mi fa felice, forse straniere destinate scritte, mai penso.
I didn't tell the pig story. Oh my God. So I go to school, grade 1, Monday morning. Teacher says, draw what you did on the weekend. I draw a pig hanging upside down with blood dripping out of its nose. On the weekend, we killed the pig.